Expensive winter sleeping gear won't magically keep you warm unless you follow some basic extra steps. That's because getting a good quality sleeping pad and sleeping bag is only half of the equation. The other half is learning how to set it up correctly, eating the right foods, setting up your tent the correct way, and many other important things. In this video, I'll go over 12 important things that you need to follow, starting from least important to most important. Lay out your sleeping bag as soon as you set up camp, because it will have more time to expand from being in a compressed state, which will make you warm up much quicker. For camping in winter, use an inflatable pillow that has at least some kind of padding on one side of it. This will minimize the heat loss coming from your head. Never breathe into your sleeping bag. You will actually temporarily become warmer, but you'll let in a lot of moisture within the sleeping bag, which will worsen its insulation properties, and you'll become cold within an hour. To cover your face, you can use a buff. Also, always wear a beanie because a lot of your body heat escapes through your head. Make sure that your body is aligned up properly within the sleeping bag and that the sleeping bag itself isn't twisted, because a lot of sleeping bags actually have more insulation on the top compared to the bottom. Also, make sure that the draft collars are sitting right at your neck so that you aren't letting in any cold air into your sleeping bag. And finally, put on the hood and tighten it as much as you want to, but make sure to leave some gap for you to breathe through. Usually you'll be warmer if you sleep curled up over to one side. Doing this exposes the least amount of your body to the ground, which will help you keep warmer. But if your sleeping bag is close to the limit while your sleeping mat is very warm with a very high R value, then it would make more sense to sleep on your back or on your belly. That's because your sleeping mat would be able to warm you more compared to your sleeping bag. Also, while sleeping, you should try to avoid moving as much as you can, because every time that you move, you're letting in cold air into your sleeping bag, which will temporarily make you colder until you warm back up again. Just before going to sleep, eat something with a lot of fat. I usually bring some olive oil and add it to my dinners. This will help you with staying warm during the first part of the night, because as you break down fat, you release a lot of energy and a lot of warmth. It's much better than eating just snacks, because they will help you stay warmer, but just for about 1 or 2 hours. Fat, on the other hand, breaks down within 3 to 5 hours, which is a much longer time. It's also really important to drink some water just before going to sleep, because your body uses it to regulate your body temperature. I recently set up my tent in pretty much the worst imaginable place because I wanted to test how well my gear performs in very extreme temperatures. You can't really see it right now, but behind that peak there's another peak that's around 200 meters higher in altitude. I pretty much set up my tent right on top of it, just 20 meters below it on a very exposed ridge. During the night, the wind picked up, and because I built it on a ridge, the wind was blowing directly against my tent right underneath the gap of the vestibule. Ideally, you should set up your tent in a way where you're sleeping in the direction of the wind. So if the wind would be coming from that direction, I would need to rotate this tent by 90 degrees so that no wind can get through the gap underneath the vestibule. Another thing that you could do if there is a lot of snow is you could push all of it right next to the gap so that it blocks all of the incoming wind. In freezing temperatures, you don't really have to worry too much about condensation in the tent because it just freezes to the walls, so you can afford to do things like these. Some good examples of where you could set up your tent is right next to some smaller trees, some rocks, or something else that would give you natural protection from the wind. Another thing that helps is getting down lower in elevation, but at the same time, you shouldn't build your tent right at the bottom of a valley because that's where all the cold air accumulates. You have to start with the right socks. Always switch to a fresh pair of merino wool socks as soon as you get into the sleeping bag. That's because if your socks are wet, even slightly, they will worsen their insulation properties. And if you've been hiking with them all day, they're full of dried up sweat, which also worsens their ability to keep your feet warm. You also should wear a second layer of loose fitting socks on top of them. And I've found that the best socks for this purpose are the most typical wool socks that you could think of. Another thing that really helps is getting dawn or synthetic booties. I personally use these cheap synthetic camp slippers and they work like a charm. Make sure that your feet are always on the sleeping pad and that they aren't touching the walls of the tent too much. And the last tip isn't really about feet, but about your hands. To keep your fingers warm, it's definitely worth it to get a pair of insulated snow gloves because they're extremely warm. Once you warm up, you usually stay warm until the morning. But if you need to exit the tent because you need to pee, well then you become cold again and you will take about 30 minutes to warm back up. I know it's gross, but for those very cold nights, it makes sense to use a pee bottle because you won't have to exit the tent and put on those extremely cold hiking boots. You shouldn't be sleeping in your rain gear, and you most definitely shouldn't be putting your feet in a backpack that isn't breathable. I recently tried putting the end of my sleeping bag in my new waterproof backpack because I've done it countless times back in Latvia. I'm originally from Latvia and it's generally considered a northern European country and we have very cold winters there. Putting your feet in a breathable backpack just adds a little bit more warmth and it's useful for those times when your feet are frozen. Anyway, I woke up after 2 hours because my feet were starting to feel cold. I took off the backpack and I noticed that the bottom end of my sleeping bag was damp. This happened because my body was releasing vapor through my feet and getting the sleeping bag wet. So the moral of the story is that you shouldn't be wearing anything that isn't breathable because all of the layers underneath will become wet and you'll become cold. But you should be wearing all other types of layers that you have, including down jackets, fleeces, base layers, hats, and even gloves. It's actually a myth that you sleep warmer if you sleep naked. In reality, the more you wear, the better, as long as it's all breathable. But at the same time, it's important to not wear too much because you don't want to start sweating. If you do, just take a layer or two off. Staying warm in winter is very much about staying dry because once you get wet or even slightly damp, you become cold. So you need to keep your clothing, your sleeping bag, and your sleeping pad as dry as humanly possible. Wearing slightly damp base layers means that you'll be colder in the night. So ideally, take them off before you go to sleep, if you think that the rest of your gear will be able to keep you warm enough. But it also depends, because if you want to dry your gear in winter, pretty much the only way to do it is to wear it overnight. Your body heat is warm enough to completely dry most of your clothing overnight. And unfortunately, sometimes there's just no other choice but to wear a wet base layer or any other clothing item while going to sleep in winter. It helps to think of your sleeping bag as a thermos. If you go to sleep and you're feeling very cold, you're gonna have a very hard time warming up. So even though in that moment you definitely don't want to do that, you should warm up first by doing some basic exercise. Anything that increases your heart rate works, like light running, doing squats, push-ups, or something similar. Trust me, this will help you warm up much quicker. A good old trick is to bring a Nalgene bottle. Simply heat up some water, pour it inside the bottle, then put it in a sock, then between your thighs, and go to sleep. This will help you warm up much quicker and also help you stay warm for at least 2 to 3 hours. Some people also like to use several hand warmers, and they work pretty much similarly to a Nalgene bottle. If earlier I said that your sleep system accounts for roughly 50% of your total ability to stay warm, then your sleeping bag accounts for roughly 20% of that. When shopping for sleeping bags, you'll usually find that there are 1 to 3 numbers written on them. You have to look at the highest of these numbers to understand what temperatures this sleeping bag is actually good for. The lower numbers are pretty much just a marketing trick. Of course, you won't die by sleeping in these temperatures, but you definitely won't want to do that again. For example, my sleeping bag, which is actually a quilt, the Outdoor Vitals Stormloft, is rated only with one number, which is -18 degrees Celsius. If you're a warm sleeper or you're sleeping with a lot of layers, then you could pretty much sleep in this temperature. But for a really warm night's sleep, I would definitely add another 5 degrees to this temperature. So I wouldn't go sleeping in the sleeping bag below -13 degrees Celsius. If you want to sleep in colder temperatures, you don't need to buy a new bag. You can just get a sleeping bag liner, which will add another 5 to 10 degrees to your sleep system. Or you could also put a summer sleeping bag inside your winter sleeping bag, which will also add a few degrees. But be careful, because if it becomes too squished, then it will lose its insulation ability and it won't really work. Dawn sleeping bags are much lighter than synthetic ones, but they do have their downsides. One of these is that if they get wet, they pretty much lose all of their insulation ability. It isn't as bad if the Dawn insulation is treated with a water repellent finish, like with this bag over here. If it gets wet, it loses some of its insulating ability, but not all of it. Another downside is that you usually warm up slower in down bags compared to synthetic bags. That's because if you squish it, it pretty much loses all of its insulating ability for a moment until it expands back up. Synthetic sleeping bags are much cheaper than Dawn ones. They'll also keep you warm if they get wet, and you'll also warm up quicker in them. But the big downside is the weight. A synthetic sleeping bag can easily weigh twice as much as a comparable Dawn sleeping bag. You gotta weigh all the pros and cons yourself, but in general, if you're a beginner, I would recommend sticking with a synthetic sleeping bag. I would argue that your sleeping pad is your most important sleep system. To prove my point, what is colder? Holding your hand like this or like this? Obviously that, because you're touching the ground and it causes heat loss much quicker when you're holding it in the air. For sleeping in freezing temperatures, your sleeping mat should have an R value of at least 4 or 5. For extremely cold temperatures, I'm talking -20, -30, that needs to increase to at least 6 or 7. The good news is that the R value of your sleeping mats can be combined by putting one on top of the other one. For example, if this foam sleeping mat has an R value of just 1 and this one has an R value of 4, then the total combined value is 5. In general though, if you find an inflatable sleeping mat with an R value of at least 3 and put it on top of a closed cell foam mat like this one, then you should be able to sleep in temperatures down to -5 degrees Celsius. If your closed cell foam pad has a reflective side, put it facing towards you so that your body heat is reflected back to you. One other thing that you could do is put an emergency blanket underneath it all to reflect back some of the heat. There are two types of inflatable sleeping pads: fully inflatable ones and self-inflating ones. The self-inflating ones aren't actually self-inflating, you still need to blow them up, but they do have some foam structure inside the mattress. In general, self-inflating pads are usually cheaper and warmer. Fully inflatable pads are more expensive, but they're also much lighter. If you're a beginner and you don't really care about the weight, then just get a self-inflating mat. But if you're like me and you care about the weight, then you'll have to get something more expensive. For example, my Nemo Tensor insulated sleeping pad cost me 180 euros. This one has an R value of 4.2. For the same price, I could get a self-inflating mat with an R value of 7. But then again, the self-inflating one would probably weigh twice as much. And lastly, you shouldn't be blowing up either one of these inflatable sleeping pads with your mouth, because you'll get moisture inside of it and then the sleeping mat will become colder. Instead, you should use a pump sack, which doesn't add any moisture to your inflatable sleeping pad, so it's able to keep you warm. In this video, I covered a lot, but I probably still missed some smaller things. So if I forgot anything, please write that down in the comments. I'll also be making 2 other videos, one about layering and one about winter hiking safety. So if you don't want to miss them out, subscribe. And that's pretty much it. Bye!